Now, ahead of President Donald Trump's state visit, there's been much discussion of Trump tariffs and what his visit could mean for the special relationship between the UK and the US. A baseline tariff of 10% is currently applied to most UK goods, a decision that's disappointed Scottish whisky and salmon businesses and an area the Prime Minister hopes to address. But will the pair reach a deal? Linda Yueh, economist and expert on Trump's tariff, shares her insight with us now. Hello, Linda. Welcome to Times at One.
Hello, Joe.
Now, what do you think the UK can best hope for? There is no doubt, as we were discussing earlier in the programme, how much Donald Trump loves and enjoys the pageantry of being here on a state visit. Is it going to be enough to persuade him to move significantly when it comes to things on the economy?
Oh, it's a great question. I think he very much does enjoy the cultural aspects, the pomp and circumstance. However, and I'm gonna actually talk about Scotch whisky as an example. So John Swinney, the report is he managed to get whisky essentially on the agenda to have its tariffs perhaps reduced to zero by bringing in US economic interests, because Scotch whisky is actually used buys use bourbon caskets, and American bourbon makers only use those caskets once.
Oh, right.
He apparently had a conversation with President Trump back in July when the president was here on a private visit. Yes, he got his introduction because, of golf and, cultural affinity, the president's mother, but he said he did not walk into the White House with that. He walked in with a transactional deal. So I think for the UK, I think that would be the approach.
Right.
So the quantum circumstance gets you into the room, but I think they need something else.
Right. Well, that's interesting. How very canny of John Swinney there as First Minister. In terms of the sort of transactional aspect, what's on the table from the UK side in order to leverage some influence on Donald Trump?
Yeah, so I think that's where some of the details which are beginning to come through suggest that on the investment side, I think there are things to offer. So we don't know the full details, but we know that big players in the AI space, NVIDIA, who produces the GPU, the China chips that power the internet, Sam Altman from OpenAI, they want to open data centers. That is mutually beneficial because you do need a data center close to the places in which commercial centers, because there's something called low latency. So in other words, you can't really have a data center in Virginia servicing business in the UK or Europe. You actually do have to locate here. So having energy is a big part of that. So I think all those we'll hear about, nuclear we'll hear about. But whether or not there's anything on the table to reduce the across-the-board tariffs of 10%, that, I think, still remains to be seen. But one area where I do think it would be important for them to immediately try to reduce the tariffs is on steel, aluminum,
Yes.
copper, because those affect about 400 products that we sell to the United States, and they're at 25%, which is half of what is levied on other countries. But that is a massive hit to UK exports, and it's mooted that sectoral tariffs are going to come in on pharmaceuticals. That's our second biggest export to the US.
Yes.
And so I do hope there is something on the table about those things, hopefully to come out soon.
I mean, what impact is this uncertainty around tariffs and the certainty of some of the tariffs that are already being applied on business, on investment, and generally on the sort of economic and business focus for the UK?
It's taking a huge amount of time. And I think so this is quite a mercurial administration. So even though the UK had the first trade deal with the US, it was still the fact that the sectoral tariffs, the Section 232 tariffs, so the steel, aluminum, copper, and then the sort of bit of a surprise that it affected 400 products because of inputs, they weren't given a heads up on that. So what that suggests is, even if you have a good relationship with the US, there's still a lot of uncertainty. What uncertainty does is actually makes firms pause. And if you look at the surveys of firms, one of the biggest factors to wait on investment is policy uncertainty. And if you have tariffs, that could be 10%, 25%, and a little bit of wait and see, because the 10% across-the-board tariffs have been deemed illegal by a U.S. appeals court, and this court's going to hear this in November, you may think, well, let me just wait until the end of November to ship my products because that I could avoid a double-digit tariff. So I think that dampens economic activity.
Well, as you say, let's talk a bit about this illegality or legality of the tariffs. What do you think the chances are of them being deemed illegal?
Yeah, so two courts have ruled that the sweeping across the board tariffs. So the two courts are the International Trade Court in the US, and there was appeal to the Federal Appeals Court in the federal system. So this is both of these courts are highly specialized, highly prestigious, but it was a split decision in the appeals court. 11 judges, 7-4 decision, and the Supreme Court will hear it in November. So essentially the ruling was the president has a delegated power to conduct trade, but Congress makes trade laws. And this is not lawful to use emergency legislation to impose across-the-board tariffs. That's not what Congress intended. And you cannot impose tariffs on China, Canada, Mexico because of exports of fentanyl. That's not an appropriate use. They did not strike down the sectoral tariffs. Because there was a split in decision in the appeals court, it does raise the question as to whether or not the Supreme Court would have the same interpretation.
Yes.
Lawyers might say if you use emergency legislation for no end date tariffs, that is too much.
Okay.
But Joe, we'll wait and see. And
we will wait and see.
May well.
Well, we may be talking again very soon. Linda Yueh, thank you very much for joining Times at One.
Se quedan, el 3 y el 4 se quedan. Adiós.
So when
as you know, right now we have a 90-day pause in effect with respect to U.S. tariffs on China and Chinese severe controls on rare earth minerals. We have been renewing that pause periodically. The current pause is set to expire November 10th. We're certainly open to considering further action there. If the talks continue in a positive direction, the United States is receiving rare earths much better than they were before. However, there's still work to be done there.
Meeting in between President Xi Jinping and Trump in the near.
I think the framework is for it to switch to U.S.-controlled ownership. But again, I'm not going to get ahead of the leaders' call on Friday. We have a framework. They'll have to confirm the deal.
Did you also discuss about purchasing Russian oil?
We discussed the poor timing of the NVIDIA investigation the day of these talks.
If the talks continue in a positive direction, the United States is receiving.
Well, anti-money laundering is different than the importation of precursor drugs. The money laundering is the result of fentanyl sales, and both the People's Republic of China's government and the U.S. government and citizens are hurt by the money laundering. The money laundering cadres are actually the offspring of groups that are evading China's capital controls, and they have now morphed into money laundering for the Mexican drug cartels. So we discussed ways that we could work together, and the Chinese delegation was very keen to work with us. It was an area of extreme agreement.
What about the severe controls on minerals? We have been renewing that pause periodically.
That I'm respecting the Fed's quiet period, which they have before every meeting, and so it's convenient for me to be here. So no current Fed officials are interviewed during the Fed quiet period.
Have a stronger economic tie with China.
To be able to come, sit down, quickly identify the issues, narrow them down to a very granular spot, and be able to come to a conclusion subject to the leader's approval. I mean, that is remarkable. I mean, U.S.-China negotiations tend to go on for months and years without results, but I have to say, too, that President Trump played a role in this. We had a call with him last night. We had specific guidance from him. We shared it with our Chinese counterparts. And without his leadership and the leverage he provides, we would not have been able to conclude the deal today.
It was a very broad-ranging discussion. We gave them an update on the state of the U.S. economy, which is going very well thanks to President Trump. We received their views on trade, the European economy, and how the Spanish-U.S. relationship can be strengthened. We were told that Spain is opening a trade office in Houston, Texas, which we were very happy about.
And we talked about Spain and how the United States has a trade surplus with Spain, which is a hallmark of a good, healthy trade relationship, so we commended them for that.